Hi everyone, my name's Dakota Kemp, and today as part of my, let's call it Death Note versus Code Geass analysis, I'm going to be looking at what drives a story, utilizing these two often compared anime. If you've seen my previous video in the series titled Light vs. Lelouch, you'll know already that I have a peculiar hatred for the claim that Death Note and Code Geass are similar stories. Basically, because all the similarities people point to are largely surface-level details, and not deep intrinsic similarities in story structure or character development. This makes for two stories that have similar wrappings, but the gifts themselves, the stories inside, are as different as can be. So I demonstrated this last time by pointing to the key story-breaking difference between the two protagonists. Go check it out if you haven't seen it, the link is in the description below. But in this video, I'm going to cover the atmosphere of the stories themselves, and what what difference makes these stories unique creatures from each other. Let's get done rapping. I'll tell you straight up, I'm not one of those YouTubers that likes to talk in circles for 10 minutes before finally giving the answer to all the riddles. I might do a little build-up from time to time, but only when it's necessary for me to make my point. In this case, that's not really needed. So, what drives a story? The answer is tension. Tension is the driving force behind stories. If you have no tension created by some form of conflict, you have no story. Now, why is that important in recognizing the intrinsic differences between Death Note and Code Geass? Well, because while tension is a must in any story, the story being told is completely dependent on the type of tension generated. That's correct. There are different types of tension, just like there are different types of conflict generating that tension. Tell me, would you ever claim that Star Wars and The Pursuit of Happiness are alike? Of course not. They're completely different stories. Both in their wrappings, one is a science fiction fantasy and the other is realistic fiction, and in their story structure. Star Wars is a hero's journey, an action-adventure coming-of-age tale, and the other is an emotional drama. But what about Underworld and Romeo and Juliet? Would you be surprised if I said they were similar stories? They appear different on the outside because of their wrappings. One is a fantasy horror film, and the other is a realistic fiction stage play. But they're actually almost identical stories at the fundamental level. They're both romance stories with the same overall premise and tension. Will the love that blooms between these star-crossed lovers be enough to triumph over the dogma of traditional hate? That premise guarantees the same type of conflict, which generates the same type of tension, despite the difference in genre and storytelling medium. The tension in both stories is the same. Now, this is all very important for Death Note and Code Geass for one reason. Their tension is not the same type. Like Interstellar and Blade Runner, they have similar wrappings, both are firmly in the sci-fi fantasy genre, but they are completely different at the fundamental level, generating vastly different conflict and tension. Death Note doesn't activate the same emotional pulls that Code Geass can get out of its audience, while Code Geass could never generate the same breathless, nail-biting anxiety that Death Note does every time Light barely wriggles out of L's latest trap. Why is that? Let's get into Death Note and Code Geass's different fundamental story structures, and how they generate specific types of tension. Death Note is a suspense thriller. It's about the brilliant maneuvers of two geniuses, one a serial killer, the other a detective, matching wits. Its tension is created by the clever plans that these two characters devise to constantly one-up each other. This is one reason why, in my opinion, the show suffers so much after killing off Light's nemesis, the other side of his coin. The stakes never feel quite the same again after L's demise. That's because one half of the equation, generating the suspense, is removed. L's death is the catharsis moment for the audience, and nothing after that feels as urgent because we, the audience, are not as enamored with or even care much about Light outwitting some random newbies that we have no stake in. But regardless, whether it's Light versus L, Light versus Near, or Light versus Mellow, the type of tension is the same. In a crime thriller such as this, all the momentum and stake of the story hinge on the tension of the game, as the players vie to outwit the others. It's dependent on the geniuses and each successive scheme they enact. A more accurate likening to Death Note would be Arthur Conan Doyle's Sherlock Holmes novels, or any of the many adaptations since. The tension is, like Death Note, primarily generated by the suspense. What will Sherlock do to outwit Moriarty? How will Moriarty respond? It's a constant cat and mouse between two brilliant minds, and may the best one win. Code Geass, on the other hand, is primarily a drama, specifically a character and political drama. Code Geass's conflict focuses on both the small struggles of the people involved in world-shaking events, while simultaneously focusing on the titanic struggles of factions and nations. Unlike Death Note, where the tension hinges on Light's schemes, the clever plans that Lelouch enacts to accomplish his goals are merely sideshows to the characters themselves, not the primary driving focus of the story. Character and political drama drive Code Geass. This can be easy to miss while enamored with beautifully drawn mecha battles, but the focus, even during these action pieces, are almost always on the characters, factions, and philosophies, not the battle itself. For instance, you'll notice that Lelouch, often on the cusp of victory, is repeatedly stymied in battle by his nemesis, Suzaku, whose role in the story, or one of his roles anyway, is to represent the weak point in Lelouch's philosophy that the ends justify the means in the name of defeating tyranny. While Suzaku repeatedly just fails to stop Lelouch for good because of the inherent weaknesses that naivety and hypocrisy play in a truly lawful good philosophy. The same can be said about the conclusion of Colin and Suzaku's arc, Lelouch and Yuffie's arc, Detard's arc, Schneisel and Lelouch's arc, Ogi and Valletta's arc, Lelouch and Nunnally's arc, and the list goes on and on. Drama between the characters and their philosophies are the driving force of the show, just as the conclusions of their conflicts are the payoff to the drama. The battles and their outcomes are indicative of the drama they represent. This is why we get such closure from seeing the show's conclusion. Lelouch defeating each successive opponent may give us a conflict payoff for that particular arc, but it doesn't damage the primary driving focus of the show. It doesn't get any less compelling when he defeats a particular antagonist, because that antagonist represents only one flaw in Lelouch's mindset and philosophy. The ending itself doesn't come until he has either reconciled himself to or grown past all of his character and philosophical flaws, culminating in us seeing a Christ-like symbolism. For instance, we see his callous disregard for others in his quest to obliterate Britannia transform into sacrificing everything he has gained for the good of others in the Zero Requiem. The audience's realization of that fact comes on the heels of its wondering if he has succumbed to the very Machiavellian, strong devour the weak attitude he so detested in the Britannian structure. Catharsis, and the ultimate resolving of the plot, comes through the resolving of character and faction philosophies to a satisfying conclusion. That is drama at its finest, not suspense. If you're looking for an example, a more accurate comparison for Code Geass would be Game of Thrones. Both have varying elements of mystery, romance, action, and fantasy that let them fit comfortably in many categories at the surface level. But both are primarily character and political dramas. The tension generated in both stories comes from individual character struggles, faction struggles, and the strain of differing philosophies. So there you have it. Death Note is a crime suspense thriller, and Code Geass is a drama. Quite different in style, structure, and execution. The tension is different, and the ultimate goal of the story is different. What do you think? Is this all a bunch of nonsense? Does the type of tension and the structure of the story matter that much? Or are the wrappings of the story more important? For now, I'm Dakota Kemp, and this is The Power of Stories. I'll see you next time.